Hey, everybody, it's the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz,
I'm Bryan Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
I'm Caleb Alexander.
and we're back with you for our second Quarantina video edition. And this time around, we brought a special guest up to the mic and up to the viewer, and it is Jack Foster returning to the show.
Hey,
Jack.
everybody, fan favorite, Jack
Fan
Foster?
favorite. Literally, I said last week, one of the funniest people I've ever encountered. That was the exact
Oh,
word.
thank you. Wait, did you say funniest or funny looking?
No, funniest film. But that was before I saw you with the sailor hat. So,
And the spit curl going. I love the
The
boat.
sailor hat and
Yeah.
stick girl.
yeah.
No, it's on brand because Trevor, my character from Gun, has a sort of irascible cowlick.
You mean gun?
Yeah.
Why yes, sir. Why yes. Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks for. It's nice to see him out in the wild.
Which,
Yes.
by the way, I didn't realize had glow in the dark.
Oh yeah, glowing.
on
in
the
the
other
dark.
side because you put it in your bookshelf, you don't realize. And then I was taking it out and bringing it up, and I'm like, holy shit!
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was reminded of that only 33 minutes ago. We're a little late because I lost power, and luckily I am on the same power grid as a hospital and the police station, so they take care of us first. So the framework I always provide for people is Superstorm Sandy. The next town over didn't have power for 15 days, and we lost power for 40 minutes. So a
But
little
you get a lot of
spoiled
people
there.
knocking on your door.
You
Can I
know,
plug
we
in?
did
Can I
have
Here's your icebox.
in all honesty,
Save
we
my
did
ice
help
cream.
some people with stuff like that, like recharging phones and things like that. All right, that's
I
neither
just
here nor
I
there.
lost power a few nights ago.
Yeah,
And it was at night and like it went like pitch dark.
yeah.
And it did kind of feel like the simulation had suddenly stopped. So I was like, because I've heard other people saying like, "Oh, great, now blackout," and I didn't get it until I was through one, and I was like, "Oh, this is deeply unsettling."
Yeah, like this is the worst episode of Black Mirror ever. I'm glad it's over.
That happens every
So-
day around like 4 or 5 o'clock. I don't know what you're talking about. Is it
So-
6 o'clock? I don't know.
Hosting. Just as a reminder, again, we are the Comic Book Bears. We are your hairy, heavy homos who talk about comics, but you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in. And Jack is here to talk about Gun. We interviewed him previously about it, but not with Caleb or with Bryan. So why don't we just start with you there, Jack? Just give us a rundown about Gun and what's going on with you and all that.
Oh, I'm so bad at the pitch. Gun is it's my comic. It is about the bad guy. I like to say it's like looking at the world of superheroes from the other side of Superman's fists, although it doesn't take place in the DC universe. So it's about a small-time super crook, Trevor Warner, who is the sinister Mr. Twist, and it kind of follows his adventures. The glow-in-the-dark. I should have that. Trade paperback that you were just holding collects our first 3 issues, which introduced Trevor and his cohort. And then the current storyline that we're working through is it's called Slaughter Ball. It's a kind of a cross between Death Race 2000 and Cannonball Run. It's this sort of underground sport of supervillains where they're all paired up in cars trying to get this time bomb called the Slaughter Ball across one of the 2 end zones on either side of America, like the East Coast or the West Coast, before it blows up in 7 days.
Cool. And Gun was the subject of one of the recent Comixology sales, right?
We were.
Yeah.
They had their best of, not to brag or anything, best of 2019. They included us in their best of 2019 sale, which is great because we got a lot more traffic, but not great because we were getting it at like 2/3 the price.
Oh, okay.
No, I kid. I'm sorry. I kid. It was great. It was great to be selected, and it was great to be spotlighted by Comixology.
Okay, well, let me first give Bryan and Caleb the opportunity to ask questions. Bryan, what you got for Jack there?
Oh man, so I thoroughly enjoyed this. I
Thank
definitely
you.
tried to like pick apart some influences and some things, and you do a great job at the end of the trade where you talk about some of that and your process and all that. So that was really cool to see, and I learned some good biographical stuff about you, which was pretty cool about our common Florida heritage.
Thank you for saying that. I was nervous about including that because, like, I think especially when you're like kind of like an indie and not particularly well known, the idea of adding like 4 or 5 pages of like, no, I'm going to talk about myself. Like, I was like, do people really want this? So thank you for saying that. I'm glad, but it was nice because I think it's fun to see, particularly like it's one thing if your story is you get discovered by DC or Marvel and they put you on a hit book and you just take off. But it's another thing if you have to kind of like figure it out and struggle like up through the ranks. And I think that's of interest to people to see like what that process is like and how discouraging it is.
You laid out all of your journey. I mean, not made all your journey, but you laid out a lot that I think creators and proto creators, let's call them, who really are trying to figure out their way in to publishing and writing and creating. And you gave a really good story of your challenges with that. And I don't think a lot of the very successful creators always talk about that as much. I mean, some of them definitely do. Like Bendis is pretty good about talking about all the rejections and all that stuff. But your experiences really are instructive, I think, and hopefully helpful. And the fact that you were able to take that rejected concept that you had pitched to DC and like Jack Staff spin it into your own thing is very useful for creators to realize and to learn. One thing I did have, stylistic choice. I have to know, when you approach this, how did you choose your pacing and your rhythm? Because one of the things I really thought was interesting about your storytelling is you do a lot of prose on page, and then panels. And then in the second issue, you do those interludes. And I didn't know if I'd want to know more about your choice with that, if you were trying to like halt or pause or sort of do something with the rhythm of the story to put those in and to kind of play with that compared to your traditional, just, which you do it everywhere else. So it's like, I knew it wasn't like a limitation. It was like, oh, this is a deliberate choice to really change the rhythm. So I didn't know if you had any specific thoughts on how that came together.
Let me flip it around. Let me ask you, what was your experience reading it?
Stylistic preference for me, and this is just me, I get stuck on prose on a page, and this is true of
I'm leaving.
This is true of like Morrison. Like Grant's done this in numerous places in his stuff, and I think everyone here realizes and probably agrees Grant Morrison is one of the best comic book creators in the last 30 years, whatever. Hickman does it too. His are a little more sparse. And it's interesting because when I interviewed Hickman like back at Heroes forever ago, I didn't ask him about this because I didn't think about it at the time. But going forward, and now that it's like an editorial thing in all the X books, it's really interesting to me the thought process that goes into that. And like, is it a rhythmic thing, or is there some nugget of story that you're trying to find a place for, and this is the place you've found? You know what I mean? Like happy accident / sort of a more of a improvisatory, or is there like a grand scheme in that choice? Does that make sense?
It does. It's a great question, actually. No one has asked me about that, and it is very much by design. I think. Wait, what's Caleb laughing at? Oh, sorry.
I was
I
laughing
think
at Bryan downing the wine.
It's a bad habit.
I think it's both, and I think like I'm in this sort of fun, like a great position to be in with comics more than like any other medium. It's very hard to make a movie all by yourself. It's very hard to make an album all by yourself. It's very hard to do anything like with just one person. But when you are both the writer and the artist, you kind of have this opportunity to decide how you're going to serve each part of the process. And there's art, which is like you have splash pages that are the art is doing all the narrative storytelling, and then you have like the normal rhythm of comics is panels, and like that's sort of what we're used to. It's art and story kind of tag teaming. But then like there's also the opportunity to just sort of like let story do the work. And I thought for those interludes in particular, like you're not I don't want to. You don't really want to go in panel for panel on it's sort of these glimpses and these introductions to these characters who we're really not even going to spend time with. It just sort of gives you a sense of this super brothel. The part that Bryan's talking about is it was one of my favorite things to actually like when I was struggling to get through the first book. I was like, oh, I just got to get through issue 1 so I can finally get to issue 2 and tell about the Mermaid Lagoon, which is this brothel for people who have superpowers, which is like not everybody gets super strength. Some people have like acid touch, and when you have acid touch, you know like you deserve love too. So like it's a brothel that caters to people with those problems, with those I shouldn't say problems, with those particular sets of issues, and with women who are, can compensate in one way or another. So a lot of them are sort of, they're a different breed of superhero or supervillain in their own right. But if you go through the book, there's not just those interludes. There's a lot of like little narrative. They're usually not like a full page. Well, they're always a full page, but they're not necessarily condensed like that. But there are moments where you're kind of letting the story pause, the action of the story pause for like kind of a story moment. Like there's a lot of musing about the nature of superpowers, and there's sometimes setting up where the next scene is going to take place. And I know that they kind of like, I know that it's sort of like, because when you're reading, you want to rip through as quick as possible, especially like, I think that where that hits is where, it's in this big chase that they're having, and it's a kind of a warp powered chase. So they're moving at a frantic speed anyway. And then suddenly you keep hitting these sort of like, they're not speed bumps, but you have to slow down. The first half of the book with those chases is almost completely wordless. I mean, not completely, but for the most part, it's all action and very little dialogue. But then, I think as a reader, I get very frustrated with that too. Like you were saying about Morrison, whenever he would do one of those Morrison-esque info dumps, I was just, oh, fuck, man.
Well, yours aren't that bad. Yours are not at all like his. His are like full stop, like two column, full page. Yeah. So I have a picture of one of them here. I don't know if you guys can see that up here.
Oh.
Metropolis inspired, I'm guessing, kind of, sort of.
Mm-hmm. It's a C-3PO in drag.
Even better. Which, by the way, I've been to a Star Wars drag show, and it is just as amazing as you think it will be.
Well,
I want the Chewbacca in drag. That's my drag Star Wars stan.
I think if you think about what you're doing with that, breaking the narrative, you see you're using full pages to do it, but it's similar to something that Tom King and Mitch Gerards did with Mr. Miracle when they fuzzed in and out. And I think that's wonderful, because it makes the reader cognizant of the narrative flow and cognizant of how individual panels or in this case entire pages are working. I know Bryan said Hickman does something very similar with that, and I think that does a really good job of almost giving you a disconnected feel. At least that was me as the reader. It made it. It's kind of like if you listen to the last episode when we went live, where I was sounding like a robot, it was just dejected, and it gives you a kind of a distance to it. And so I was fascinated by the effect that had on the narrative, especially because of when it always came at those kind of integral points to the story, almost to the lead up to the culmination, and then you would just start breaking it up with those shots. I thought that was fantastic.
Thank you, Caleb. You read it correctly.
You, sir, have won.
I'm going to get kicked off the show now, but
so I think I'm going to get kicked off the show.
I really want to emphasize too, though, that this second issue is probably my favorite. It's partly because you do a very fair and nice job of portraying sex workers, which I have several friends and people I've met over the years who are sex workers, and it's something that is misunderstood, to say the least, about what they have to deal with, both good and bad. So I think you've done a really great job of capturing that. I also really love the fact that there's a trans character here, who I kept thinking visually reminded me, like when I didn't know what their gender was at first, I was very like, oh, that kind of looks like Alaska, kind of like out of drag, maybe a little bit Alaska. And then later on, I think, and I mean spoilers here a little bit. I guess that's kind of a spoiler. I don't know. You know, when it's revealed that they're, you know, they're trans, it's a little more like, oh, cool, all right, great, because you know, some art you just like, well, okay, that's a choice, like they're going for that like boyish look. But you know, I appreciated that you put both of those in that second issue, and then also the setting of Vegas, which I'm assuming that is not a real location. That is not okay. It is a really cool, atmospheric, very appropriate to that part of the country. Spending time now in Vegas and Mojave and Route 66 and all of that, like it just absolutely belongs. Not that they'd have a real superpower, you know, brothel thing, but like that concept, that location that you depicted. I mean, beautiful world building and really authentic to even our existence. You know.
Let me two things. First of all, because you're from Orlando, that was actually based on Wiki Wachi. Do you remember Wiki Wachi?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh.
The Beautiful Mermaid show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for people who aren't from Florida, lucky you. Wiki Wachi Springs was this sort of natural spring. So in the 50s, they had starting in the 50s, they had these mermaid shows where there are these girls in sort of mermaid suits who would swim underwater. And you would go down into these tanks. Well, you would go down into these bars built around these tanks, and then you would just sort of look and watch the mermaids sort of swim around. And like it's I transplanted it to the desert for the Mermaid Lagoon for the kind of the reasons, well, geography and story too, but it was supposed to have that kind of that like if you've ever driven down Route 66 now, it's this sort of, you know, it's a little run down, and it used to be the mother road. It sort of like was the lifeline of America, and like a lot of things in the 50s and that sort of jet age promise. It's a little run down now and kind of shabby. I thought that tied in kind of perfectly with it. And then two, I love the character you're talking about is Sugar Buzz, who's the trans character. She was really only meant to just sort of appear in that issue, but I like kind of fell in love with her. So now she's a bigger part of the story as it continues.
Yay.
Yeah. And she's the most fun to write for. Her scenes write themselves. It's a total joy. My only tiny regret, like I feel like I did everything that I could to earn having her be like a real fleshed out trans person, but I still cringe that she's a sex worker, because I feel like trans people, they're like, could you make a character not be a sex worker, please? And I get that. Like in the 90s, it was like, could you please have a gay character who doesn't have AIDS?
It's a fair point, but honestly, I mean, it's a fair point. But I think I wouldn't feel too.
It is.
I mean, you know, like sounds like she's gonna have a life of her own and in a different way, and so just because that's like a vocation doesn't mean that's the end of their character. So I mean, I think that's fair.
True, and I think that I tried to do service to both being trans and to being a sex worker. I think that I had heard from a sex worker, I think in a documentary, was you think because you would feel ashamed to do these things that I feel ashamed to do them, and I don't. And that's your issue and not mine. And I think that is like, which is like, I don't want to, I think there's a lot of reasons, and like people don't always have agency, and that's not necessarily why they choose that kind of work. But just because you have sort of ideas in your head about how you would feel about doing it doesn't necessarily, like it doesn't, you know, like it's everyone is allowed to make their own decisions about their agency in those situations.
So I think I think you handled it very well, and I mean it's something I look out for. Obviously, I think all of us kind of have an appreciation and a perspective that we try to, you know, listen to the community and make sure the community is represented. Yeah. The other thing I want to ask about, and then I'll stop, you know, badgering you here.
No, I love it.
There's a lot
sorry if I'm talking too much.
No, we want to hear you talk, right? The jokes, the whole series is very funny. It's very funny. It reminded me of Venture Brothers a little bit with the henching and the arch villains and sort of the world building that you've done to that end, or the boys to some extent. I mean, you know, anything that takes that superhero and villain idea and turns it on its head and all that. Visually though, your art's great. Like it reminds me of like a Fraser Irving or Janet Leigh.
Wow.
I actually thought some Janet Leigh in there,
yeah.
Friend of ours who we've all spent a little time with, I think. Like, tell us about your influences from the comics community. I know you mentioned some of them, like Sienkiewicz and all that in the end, but who do you draw strength from, and not inspiration, or you know, you're not copying, but who are the people you definitely relate to the most in the visual world?
There are. It's
two.
tricky. everyone. You know what? I actually, uh, not Mike Mignola. All right, I'm 45, so go back to the early days of time. He had done one of the very early graphic novels was Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange. Doctor Doom's mother is in hell, and he teams up with Doctor Strange to go rescue his mother from Mephisto. Mike Mignola did the art, and he watercolored the cover. He may have done watercolored the inside, but he definitely did the cover. And it was one of the first times that I had seen somebody do like. And Mike Mignola's comic book art, if you remember it, before he went on to Hellboy and sort of like his more esoteric sort of work. His comic book art didn't look like he certainly didn't look like John Byrne or Arthur Adams, but he it still fit. Like it worked in like he made great comic art. I wish he would do more. I miss it, and there's nobody else like him. But so like seeing comic book art that was A, not conventional, and then B, sort of painted in this like a lot of times like because watercolor is an easy medium to sort of quickly paint something up if you want to like color. Like if you wanted to color a cover of a magazine back in the day before digital, you could do it in watercolor, but it's just coloring. It's not necessarily capturing the technique of watercolor, which is I think very beautiful and amazing. So that Magnolia cover, like I was like, oh, this isn't just he's not coloring it, he's painting it. This is a watercolor painting of a comic book medium, and there were other people who were doing it at the time. Sienkiewicz, obviously, a great example. The Hampton brother, Bo and Scott Hampton, were kind of bringing fine art techniques into comics. But that was the first one that I saw, and it left a big impression. Although I don't emulate Mignola's style because he's kind of a one of a kind. But then, other than that, I think it's like, I think the minute you start to become too influenced by, like, if you made music and people kept saying like, "Hey, this is kind of David Bowie-ish," and you're like, "Whoa, I love David Bowie," you'd be like, "Well, to be your own person, you have to stop. You have to stop aping your image." So I think, yeah, I think it's like, and now we live in a world where a lot of art is digital, which is great, and I love digital art. Not to know that is not dismissive, but being a guy who's working analog and doing watercolor, like it's gonna look like its own thing anyway, just because there's fewer and fewer people who work that way. And I think it like the book, it has its own look, and I think like that thing that we were just talking about with like Route 66 and sort of like the decay of the jet age, that is sort of like I'm working on the current issue, and in the current issue they go into space, and I've been doing research for like what do I want the spaceships in this world to look like, and stuff like that. And it's I've been looking at a lot of Sid Mead, who was the guy who was like the designer for I don't you guys know, for people who don't know, the guy who's like the designer for like Blade Runner and a lot of like 1980s sci-fi, like I think the first version of Dune, the Jodorowsky Dune, I think he was on that too. So he sort of designed science fiction in the 80s, which I think influenced just almost everybody, as far as how we thought the future would look. But that look is now 20 or 30 years old. So like it's this sort of retro future look, and that was sort of the look that I was going for. And I think the book, because it has that sort of like that analog warm feel, it looks like displaced in time in a way.
Well, Jack, as somebody who collects original art and who is in love with the actual tangible product, I want to applaud you for sticking with analog, because digital art looks great in the book, but there's just something about having the ability to hang it on your wall, and you can tell, right? Like you can tell the difference. There's a difference in actual brushstrokes versus simulated brushstrokes. So I want to kind of piggyback off of what Bryan was talking about, though, if I can, for a minute. The way you were laying out panels, and the way, I mean, this goes into kind of the formatting of the book as well, but it seems like there was a little bit of, it reminded me of layouts by people like J.H. Williams in the Sandman layout, and the way they blurred the lines in the image. And as I was reading it, and this is going to make Bill happy just because he gets happy every time this name gets dropped, but there was a little bit of Matt Wagner there. And so I was curious if kind of the structure of those individuals, and a little bit of Simone Bianchi as well, to that too, and in the way they work. But I was wondering if that structure of how they oh, my brain shut off, how they design a page, or how they
right
they bring that into the world. Like, was that an early influence? Are those people that you know that were somewhere in the well that you pull out of? Obviously, you have your own style and you've done your own thing, but do your roots tap into that?
Um, to Matt Wagner, absolutely. I think we were having a pre-show conversation about Comico and Matt Wagner, and like I think Grendel was not it was very early. Like I've been reading comics since I was a kid, like 8 or 9, and then I think Grendel I discovered in high school, um, and then backwards from that, some of his earlier work, he's got a. I mean, he's another one of those people who, like, like at the time when you have other, like, I love George Perez. I grew up reading the Titans. Like, I love John Byrne. Yeah, I know, right? Like, these guys are masters, but they're also sort of like they're very like when you think about comic book art, they're that's amazing. Oh my gosh, God love them. They're like the standard, and then the I think as the medium evolved a little, you had more people who started to kind of, I think, like, it doesn't just have to be these panel, like, it doesn't have to be what we've seen. We can make it like, I think Matt Wagner really pushed a lot of like Art Nouveau, and like what you're saying about like panel structure, like making those panels not just the frame that something's happening in, but a part of the artwork, artwork in and of itself. And that, like, I mean, the answer to your question is, I've been reading comics since I was a kid. I worked in a comic shop when I right out of high school. I've been connected to comics, like, and like I read comic book, like 4-color comic books. I read indie books. I read, Dan Close. I read, like as the medium exchange evolved, I evolved. I went with it. So I think when you take all that stuff in over like the course of 25 years, like when I first started actually working on Gun on the very first issue, it was like, I've always wanted to make a comic. And like, I want to take everything that I've like learned, like, what is the comic now that you are doing it? What is the kind of comic that you want to make? And let me see if this will work. I don't know. So like, I'm super linear as far as like panel design. Like, so I have those are from the Bill Sienkiewicz Moby Dick Classics Illustrated Edition, which if you don't have, is like it's one of his best books. It's so fucking amazing. And he just, like, I don't know if you can see, he's just doing stuff with panels, with how he like arranges like the flow of narrative, and he lets the art sort of dictate as much as he lets the words. And so like, this is where I work while I'm doing the writing. The art table is where I do the art. So while I'm writing, I try to like, think about it, not just, like, these balloons have to fill into this space, but like make it art, make it arty. Does that answer your
No,
question?
absolutely. And I think that's, like I said, that's where a little bit of the transformative nature of, I think that's where I pulled the J.H. Williams reference from.
Yeah.
And I think you see some of that in your characters as well. As I was reading it and realizing that that Sugar was a trans character, and that there was kind of that personality there, it reminded me a lot of, I think, somebody who changed the medium and is still changing the medium, Neil Gaiman, the Sandman.
Oh, fuck
which
yeah,
was,
yeah.
For me, that's where I saw my first trans character in comics. Was in that.
I think all of us.
Yeah. Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
But I see some of that writing style. But I also wanted to ask you, outside of that, I think there's one element of your work that, and maybe I could be completely wrong, that we kind of hit on. There's almost a noir element to the voice of your narrator. How much of crime noir was a driving force to your plot?
There's definitely like this is so early on when I started making the book, I kind of felt like I had to like, while you're making the book, you're also thinking about how you're going to market the book, because like I wanted to be able to keep making it. So like the aesthetic that I was building for the book was I was like, oh, you gotta wrangle around something, and I didn't think it was a traditional comic book, like a superhero comic book. And this is not a. I love superhero comics, and I cut me and I bleed four colors. But I think if you just want like action scenes and laser beams, you are gonna be so frustrated because like, the book is just a lot of two people in a room talking to each other while other stuff happens around them. So it was like, don't dress it up too much like a superhero book. And on the same token, I don't like, there are a couple of things that it's not. But I started to kind of like, it's kind of neo noir, and it's sort of it's there's a lot of neon and like fog ridden streets and things like that. I think for I my the the experience of making it is always different from me than the experience of reading it. For me, I think it's too funny to not to be noir precisely, because I think noir has a dark outset. Like the world, you cannot trust the world. Knowledge does not win out over. It's like Empire Strikes Back. All the things in Empire Strikes Back. The good guy does not win at the end. The world is rigged against you. Knowing things will not make you stronger or better. And the mindset of noir is very. I don't think it's actually the aesthetic of the aesthetic, yes, but I don't think it's the heart. The heart of the book is like, these are kind of immoral people who I think are fun to be around. Like like doing a book about supervillains in like 2016, 2017, and 2018 is a really difficult premise, because people in the face of real evil are like, I don't want to hear about evil people. I don't want to hear about evil people and their schemes and what they're doing and how they get away with it, because there's too much of it going on in the news and it's driving me crazy. But I don't think that the characters in Gun, although they are sort of like oriented towards crime, I don't think that they're evil. I think that like, if you think a lot about crime and why people commit it, they're people who are just trying to make their way in the world, and they have this little thing that might be the thing that helps them do it, and it may be at the expense of other people, and for one reason or another they're willing to make that step, and maybe that is kind of noir. But
it's like I don't know
think
that it's noir. I think it's just a more nuanced understanding of crime. Like if you watch Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul or any one at Sopranos, like you understand that, it's the Disney, you even I think kind of quoted this, what's the video game character? Wreck-It Ralph.
Oh, right.
And there's the therapy group, and it's like, I'm not a bad guy. I'm not a bad guy. It's that whole thing. I mean,
I'm a bad guy, not a bad guy.
Yeah, no, it's an honest realization that there are people who are in crime who will do things they need to do, but aren't like inherently outwardly otherwise bad. So.
No, and I think that's a main tension of the book is the relationship between Olive and Trevor, and I think they're two people who are genuinely looking out for each other. A spoiler: there's a period in the book when she thinks he's kind of fucked her over, and makes some decisions based on that. And when they kind of reunite, he just has this great moment of like, you have to learn how to trust people, which is an interesting bit of dialogue that come from a villain. Mm-hmm. Especially one who spent a lot of the book doing like underhanded things to other people, but there are like the people in your circle that you're going to protect and the people outside of your circle that you are just at war with. And I think the book, like it's not, I don't think it's not light, but it's I think it's the way I like to sometimes market it is bonhomie among ne'er-do-wells. So it's like there's a feel good feeling among these people, even if the things that they do there. Yeah, exactly. So that's I think it is noirish, but I don't think like tonally I don't think it's completely
no, and I think there was when I said that, there's, like I said, it's a building block. It's not the foundation. I think one of my favorite lines in the entire book was from Trevor, and he said, "I'm a bad guy, but I'm not a bad guy."
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think that sums it up perfectly. But I mean, if you think about noir and in a lot of ways detective noir, those types of stories, like things like The Maltese Falcon or Devil in a Blue Dress. These main characters are not quote unquote good people, but they're not the villains in the story either.
Right.
They're more nuanced than that, and it invites a more of a character study than a plot study. It's asking you to dive deep into your own understanding of, I don't necessarily want to call it morality, but maybe ethics, our own personal ethics of it.
Yes, and you bring up a good point, which is to say, you have your central character who is like here, on the spectrum. And then he, in his cohort of people, has people who are like slightly more functional, and then who are, you know, wildly not. And you know, I think like a thing that I feel, or personally, is like, you know, like you're the guy who's just trying to like make it through life and get your shit together, and like you maybe have your kind of way of doing it, and you know people who like, some are like, oh, I have a home and I you know, show up for life, and they've got it figured out. And then you've got other people who are like I can't like a stamp and get my bills paid on time. So like in that mix, you're always surrounded by people who are like vacillating, you know, like doing a little better and then maybe doing a little worse than you. And you just sort of like, I think in his world it's a little exaggerated because all these people are criminals and sort of outside of the normal system anyway. But if you think about gay culture, isn't gay culture a little like, we are also outsiders, and we are also like, we are also a community, not of criminals, but we're a community of people who like don't necessarily follow the normal life, who aren't going to get the 9-to-5 job and marry a, you know, and get a house and a dog and a, you know, I mean, some do, but you know, not all of us. And like
I don't know. I
so,
was
you know,
always
like,
told I was always told be gay, do crime. So I thought we were all criminals.
oh my god, I have that shirt.
It's you crime.
I almost wore it, but missed opportunity.
You know, it's interesting, like going along with the idea of, I guess he's over here, with the idea of crime or noir as kind of the feeling. I think a lot of that just comes from the narration being in the first person, being from Trevor. But like a noir detective, you're getting a very distinct perspective on the world that's out there. So, you know, early in the first issue or in the first part, if you have the trade, there's he really describes kind of his history, like his bona fides, where he's like, okay, I've fought against gods and demigods, you know, dudes in metal suits. I've gone to space. I fought a future version of myself who maybe was trying to stop me to end of the world, or you know, just I owed him money. Like, just you know, kind of going through all of these things, and it's a perspective we don't usually get very often from, you know, the villain side of it. Like, sure, the only time we really get in the majority of comics that involve themselves with superheroes and supervillains, the only time we really get the supervillain perspective is when they're giving their now that I've caught you, I'm going to show you my plan speech, where it's like, this explains why I'm doing everything and what I'm going to do. You don't
what's the line from Watchmen? I'm gonna monologue like a Republic serial villain.
Yeah. Like, yes, you know, and that's kind of like what we don't see the other side of it. We don't see the okay guys, and again, going back to the first issue, which is a wonderful setup. Okay, so we need somebody to actually build the trap doors and, you know, install all of the like deadly chemical sprays, and we need like, there's a whole bunch of work and existence that happens, you know, in the gutters of the panels of superhero comics that, you know, involves the supervillains actually doing a lot more work than the superheroes tend to do.
Oh my god, yeah.
You know,
and where's their parade?
Yeah, nothing for them. It's like, oh, sure, they killed a whole bunch of people and stole like billions of dollars, but whatever. Like, you know, they really need to be spotlighted here. And it's funny, something that also just recently has been available if you have the DCU, if you've been watching the Harley Quinn series. They had a recent episode where oh my god, where they're basically setting up all of the you know, all the background, the plans to split up New Gotham, and they're like, okay, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this, and you're gonna do this, and this is gonna be this kind of land. It's very video gamey, but you know that they joke about how much work went into it. It's like, well, you didn't show up for the meeting, so of course you get this little shitty island over here. Like, but like, there's
Gotham Heights.
Yeah, Gotham Heights. There's so much work that happens. There's so much that's going on from the villain perspective that we never really see, and so this gives it a really good perspective. And the fact that it's, you know, done in a narrative style where it's first person, where he's explaining his history, where he's talking about his take on things. I think you get a really great pair of eyes to see this world through, and that's how we're being introduced to any superhero, any superheroes, which there aren't that many that show up. But just every.
They have their own books.
Oh yeah, they already have their own universe somewhere else. It's fine.
Yeah.
Are we going
But,
to talk about
thank
how
you.
when you said supervillain, Brian picked up a Sphinx cat? Are we just going to?
Yeah, I was like, am I the only one who doesn't? I'm the only one not in my secret
I'm just
lair.
gonna leave that on
We
the
need to
table.
have him like
I
this.
could not have timed this any better. He was like on my desk looking at me like, "Hey, I'm freezing. Could you give me some love here?" And I was like, "Mr. Bigglesworth, come to me."
Thank you, Steve, for all those. I mean, I think that like it is fun to think. Like it's like I mean, I did. It's called Gun. Good guys are called capes. Bad guys are guns. Because I wanted it to be about the profession. Like as much. We follow Trevor. Trevor is our central character, and a lot of characters spin in and around him. But it's really about like what that like just what it's like to be on, and also specifically like these are the not like these are the Z-listers. These are the guys that like. These are the guys that didn't even make the long Halloween. Like they, Batman doesn't even take care of them. He sends out like a huntress or like the calendar man's at it again. Because I think I think for two reasons. I think those are the more interesting stories. And like you were saying, like when villains are monologuing, I think that's like the least interesting. When I started the book, there were a couple of like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to make him sort of like, I don't want him to be an anti-hero. Like, frequently they'll have a bad guy, but then you introduce someone who's worse than him, so he's kind of mostly working for the good. And I was like, no, I want him to be a bad guy who's morally, directed in a way that we can acknowledge is wrong, and does things that we don't accept. That's why in the beginning at the auction, like selling off the passed out superhero that they kidnap is terrible. And I mean. I don't know what happens to her. I assume since good guys always get out of their jams that like the worst didn't happen, but we never touch back on it. So like he's not a good dude in that sense, but I think the profession is kind of an interesting, like if you want to take it and think it out and like what are these things like and who does the work and what's that community like? That's like it's fun, it's fascinating, it's a great place to live. And then like I think storytelling, if you can make a fun world, that's those are the ones that last.
Yeah. So Jack, we've talked a lot about what you've done and kind of where you've been. I'm kind of curious about where you're going to go. Are you? I mean, so I know that you've got another trade for Gun in the works and or ready to hit the road. But are you dabbling in other universes? Are you wanting to dip into other types of stories? Are there other narratives that you're wanting to splay out in comic form?
I'm in a really sort of unique position. Gun. It's a small like. Can we do like indie corner for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you guys. You mostly cover like Marvel and DC. I love Marvel and DC too. But can we just to the fans, fans of the podcast? It's so hard. I'm not talking about myself. I work with other I work with other creators, or I know other creators. It's a community of people. They are my brothers and sisters. It is so hard. This is a very tough time for a lot of people. Like a lot of these conventions that are closing, where this is how a lot of indie comic makers make their, they aren't in previews. They don't get to go to all they don't get put in all the comic shops. So these conventions are the way that they make a lot of the money that they make, which enables them. This isn't, I would say like 50% of the comics, indie comics or small press comics that you're reading, these people, it's not their primary job. They still have a day job that they have to do, and they do this other thing because they love it. And I know everyone is really feeling pressed right now. Like not like everybody is sort of like feeling pinched. But there are a ton of things that are sort of like free, and if you just have a little bit of extra time, which suddenly we do, if you like some of these indie or small press works, first of all, like you can get a hold of all these creators in one way or another. Let them know. Like a lot of people are banging their heads against the wall, wondering like, should I keep doing this? And like, just let them know. Again, I'm not talking about myself. if you can, like, if you got comics from an indie guy on Comixology, give them stars. Like, you don't have to give them 5 stars. You can be like, well, there's only 3 stars, but give them, like those are so, it takes a second. You don't have to write a review. You just give them a couple stars. And those, like, when for example, when I talk to other like distributors like Diamond, or when I talk to other publishers to try and pick up the book or things like that, like, these are the things that they look at. They ask me how many followers I have. They ask me how many, like, they want to know who's, like, they want to know what the footprint of the book is. And a lot of that depends on just sort of like the people sort of responding well to it. If you can write a review or visit a Facebook page and write a review for their page, like, and it doesn't have to, no one has to be like fake or an asshole about it. You know, you just be like, hey, I really like this book. I worked in a comic shop. The best way to sell comics, is one person saying to another person, like, I really like this comic. And that is how half the comics that I love, that's how I got a hold of them. And that's how I saw people, like, people would say, like, oh, you should check this out. And then they would, and they would pick it up and they would buy it. And then they would keep getting it, or, you know. So, like, if you like indie comics, like them, share them, retweet. I feel like there's this sort of like culture of cool on social media where it's like, oh, I'm not gonna like them, I'm not gonna retweet that. Let that all go. Like, these people, like, it's like, we think about things as civilians, like, likes don't matter, and who cares how many followers you have, and that's not, those aren't measures of a real life, and that's absolutely true. But in this other world, these things are currency. And like, for indies, it is like, it is so hard, you know, like, and the thing is, when you have 10 or 15 reviews on Amazon, like, that looks very good for your, and it's one of those things, like, it's an easy thing for a fan to do, but it means so much, like, so much. So if you like indie comics out there, this is a tough time, and you don't have to send money, you don't have to buy it, you know, like, everyone is feeling a pinch, but these are just little things that and they help these people enormously. So maybe, you know, that's my that's my indie corner.
Well, I know with the books that some of our boys here are talking about, we'll have a couple revisits over to that corner later. Steve, is there anything else you'd like to cover with Jack, since you didn't officially get the interview baton passed to you?
No, well, no, it's fine. I mean,
Yep.
You and I, we talked to Jack when he was on the show last, and we covered a lot of ground with Gunn. I remember on that. That was that was a really great show. And
that was great for me too.
Yeah, it was just fun talking to you, and of course it's wonderful.
Oh yeah, totally. You guys are awesome. It's fun. I wish we were just hanging. I mean, it is just like hanging out with the guys.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I'm glad that Caleb and Bryan got to ask some questions and got to talk about the book, which is really good. So.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah. So apart from the things you've discussed, Jack, is there anything in regards to maybe awards ceremonies that you might want to talk about?
Is it that time of year again? Is it Ringo Award nomination season? Have you guys put up a tree yet?
I'm wondering.
If your listeners don't know, the Ringo Awards are named for Mike Waringo, who's phenomenal comic book artist. And they have so Baltimore Comic Con, historically, was it the Harveys? The Harveys were
it was the Harveys, and then they moved it. Yeah.
And then the New York snatched them up and took them to New York Comic Con. And Baltimore, by the way, I will say this: Baltimore Comic Con is one of my favorite cons. I know a lot of people talk of HeroCon, which is great, but like Baltimore has my heart. It is really a comic lovers con. So if we ever go to conventions again, give it a check. So they like the award show, so they decided to create the Ringo Awards, and they wanted to tweak it a little bit. And the Ringos are some are sort of like professionally nominated, and then other ones are fan nominated. And fan nominated awards kind of opens it up for. I mean, it's a tricky calculus because many indies do not have as many fans as, say, the X-Men. But on the same token, if fans have a megaphone, they can sort of propel work. So I am here to plead with your listeners, you would consider, while voting for your favorite comics of 2019 for the Ringo Awards, maybe consider Gun. And there's a particular category. They have a special category which they call cartoonist, which is for writer artists, of which there aren't a ton. And it's a very special category, and it's one that personally, some of my favorite comics, as a guy who does both, some of my favorite comics are from that. You know, they're I'm thinking of like Stray Toasters and Bill Sienkiewicz and Hellboy, Mike Mignola. It's a really, really, really special category because like not everybody can do both, and when you get both, you get this sort of this really personal, like only one person can make that thing, and that collaborative work is also great. But there is a lot of collaborative work, but like very, very, very personal individual work is also kind of amazing in its own separate, different way. So while nominating, the Hickman run, maybe mention Jack Foster for best cartoonist if you don't have another writer combo in mind. Although there aren't a lot. But what about you guys? Who are your so for the Ringo Awards? Do you guys have any books from 2019 that you are championing?
Ooh, I used to be. You can see what's in back of me. I used to be
Very small
religious.
comics.
Yeah, very tiny ones. I used to be religious about, okay, this is my top 10 list of music and this and that. And at some point, I really trailed off because I would think that at some point, I've just been very busy in terms of my professional career the last few years, and there's so many top 10 lists that I would put together that would have to be revised when I finally got to stuff that I've been tabling. So I really haven't given that too much thought, actually. The one book that I would say, and I actually mentioned this on cable, God damn it, I do it again.
You have a cable access show in addition to podcast?
Yeah, apparently.
On Caleb's show, Southern Fried Greek, there was a book called The House that came out from Fantagraphics. I'll get the name. I can't think of the gentleman's name. He's from Spain, and that definitely was my top graphic novel of the year. Scenario was there was a basically like maybe like one step above working class gentleman in Spain who saved enough to get a house in what is predominantly a vacation area, and he dies, and there are 3 children that are debating about what to do with the house, and which
Like The
sounds
Descendants.
yeah, so it sounds like 3 minutes. It's one of those situations like Whiteout, a serial killer in Antarctica. You think there's like 3 minutes of plot there, but it just touches on so many issues of family relationships and the complexities of family relationships, even when the family members get along, and that just touched on a lot of things for me. So that was my favorite from last year.
Hey, Bill, the writer artist on that is Paco Roca.
Paco Roca, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the Ringo Awards are one of those things that it has a special place in my heart because I was such a big fan of Mike Ringo. And so I'm pretty on the ball when it comes to those, to filling out that award. And unfortunately, I'm going to go ahead and make a confession. I have already filled out my ballot, but my husband is not, and he will be filling out his tomorrow, and he will be putting in Jack Foster's name to make up.
Well, I mean, let me just say, like, I this part of the job, I love making the comic. The promoting part is sometimes like it's very. I wouldn't, under normal circumstances, stand in front of you and say, "Hey, vote for me for being the best."
No, you
but
should.
This is kind of
you absolutely should.
I think the Ringos are particularly. I think one of the reasons why they're fan nominated is because they want to sort of open out to like the Eisners, which are great, do tend to kind of like hew very closely to what is it's like kind of like the Oscars, like
Yeah.
the movies that did really well are
Mhm.
also going to get the Oscars.
Yeah. And that
I think the
even
Ring,
extends to the independent side with
yes,
the Harveys. It's
Yeah.
usually high profile.
yeah, and I think also Harvey's, like when you are recognizing independent talent, like it becomes a sort of a broader field. Like it's books that are like that are more less traditionally comic-y and more sort of interesting explorations of art, and that is hard to like if you're a guy that looks like a comic, it's kind of hard to get noticed there. But the Ringos are a great spot. So like this is sort of one of the areas in which like it's hard to make a huge splash in this particular, like, think about it. Most of these websites who are devoted to comics, like they're covering the Avengers movies, they're covering Wonder Woman 84, like they're not even covering comics, they're covering like mass culture, or
Right.
popular culture, and so to be a comic guy who also isn't even DC or Marvel is so hard to get like bandwidth and stuff like that. And these awards are sort of like a small way that like like it can make a blip, it can sort of like, hey, check this out. So that is, and I think like when you are doing very personal work, you want to sort of like make it you just hope that like people like it's the kind of stuff that like, oh, awards recognize that. So I'm sorry, that's why I'm standing here asking, but by all means vote for who you think is the best.
Well, no, and I just said that because unfortunately I'd already cast my ballot before I jump in here. But you were asking about other sections of the world that you would that we can nominate for. Um, One of the coolest things from the past year that I've gotten into, now that I'm, people listening know I'm in law school and I have to make the best use of my time, is reading web comics
oh,
on my
right.
phone. And there's now a new platform called Webtoons, which I want to say is a Korean-based company. Um, I am fortunate to be really good friends with a guy named Justin Jordan, who is a kind of prominent comics writer, but he has a Webtoons comic with a guy named John Amore called Urban Animal, which is phenomenal. So if you haven't checked that out on that platform, I would really encourage you. And kind of that same thing when they're dropping your name into the cartoonist category, drop Urban Animal in there for webcomic because it's gorgeous. It's really fun. And
I
it's one
haven't
of it's
filled out mine. I'll put it in.
yeah.
All right, Steve, you're next in line.
Oh, with me, I especially lately, I've been kind of going back and reading a lot of older stuff, well, older from last year, of all things. Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
it does feel like 20 years ago.
it does, it really does. Well, and it's not like we're getting a lot of new stuff, except for webcomics, which is really interesting that we can still definitely get new things. We can get new things. We don't have to wait for a giant distributor to come back online and send us stuff. But it is kind of interesting how many things that have sort of, I guess from like the big two, a lot of things that have caught my attention that normally wouldn't. But also even for and I know they're not super small press anymore, but Valiant Comics and Dark Horse's Berger books, with Karen Berger, formerly of Vertigo. I've really been enjoying a lot of the stuff that she's been finding and that she's been curating on her with her group. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not big sellers. I mean, these are not comics that a lot of people are going to be reading necessarily because they don't fit a niche super easily. And one of them, of course, Invisible Kingdom. And
that one, I love that one.
Yeah,
the art in that is phenomenal.
It's beautiful.
I mean, the story's great, but
yeah, a beautiful story, beautiful art, and it's a little bit different from a lot of things that people normally would gravitate to, but it's got sci-fi, it's got sort of high concept, sort of conspiracy, religion, culture, a lot of that sort of focus. And I can't remember for the life of me right now who writes and draws that, so I apologize.
It's Christian Ward is
Yes.
Is the artist, and then
What is her name?
Blinking. Yeah.
G. Willow Wilson.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ah.
So G. Willow. So these are, of course, here's a writer, here's an artist that have been around the big two, the big three for a while, but this gives them a chance to do something that's very, very focused and very personal. And doesn't have like a huge audience. It's for sure, it's not something that's going to appeal to everybody, but it's a beautiful story, and it's beautifully drawn, and
beautiful.
From Karen Berger, it is a big publisher. It's Dark Horse that's doing it, but it's Bergerborg, so it's like a very small segment of it, a very specialized pop-up label, to give DC's terminology for it. But I've just been really enjoying seeing that kind of stuff. And then also, I'll throw this out there because I know Bill's talked about it, but the Hill House books, and Caleb, I know you've talked about it.
I only talked about the Plunge.
Yeah, the Plunge.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other books have been great because they feature writers that weren't necessarily comic writers. Like,
those guys. Oh yeah, get out of here.
Yeah, but again, they got into the world of prose, and they're like, I think we can put this to pictures, and shockingly are doing a really great job at it. I mean, Joe Hill obviously has been doing it forever with IDW and with Lock and Key and the Cape and all that, but with I'm terrible with names, but I think it's Lauren Machado, who is doing the Low Woods. That to me has been just a pleasure to read because it's so strange and weird and wild and very queer centric, because it is, it's very, like, the central characters are lesbians or bi, mostly lesbian, but the story itself is just very strange, and it is very local Pennsylvania. So it's kind of like backwoods, coal town, dying small town, but with a very strong supernatural element that a lot of people seem to take for granted, even though it's horrific. But it's a great little book too, and that one started in 2019. Hopefully, we get to finish it at some point. But anyway, that's me. Bryan, what about you?
So I had to go back to my shelf. That's if you saw me, I was like scooting back here to look. So I'm like, I have the worst memory. My last year of my life is a blur. But I grabbed two things. If I had to go with something that was really unique, is the Pervert, talking about trans characters and sex work. Remy Boydell and Michelle Perez. Like, are you guys familiar? I think we talked about this. Did we talk about this? Maybe.
I don't think we did.
I may have talked about it on Flame On. I can't.
I think
Yeah, I think Flame On.
But like, great if you want to learn more about nice. You want to learn more about sex worker experiences, and again, from a trans woman's character's perspective, it's really one of the best. But I checked the copyright 2018, so we go with Action Hospital. This one is definitely 2019. Yep, that's the first volume.
Here's the first volume.
Yeah, Dave Baker is somebody who I've met at Heroes. I think I first met him at Heroes. Yeah. And I've seen him now also with Nicole. I can never say her last name. Is it Gal? Let's go with Gal. Anyway, it's ridiculous and bizarre, and very much in the conversation we had about Ryan Brown's art and storytelling choices. Like, that's more of this and that. Like, they're cut from the same cloth. But Dave's stuff is insane. Like, he spends like the time to do panels, like the detail that he puts in.
From him.
It's insane. Yeah. Like, he's just intense,
and
he's hilarious and very young, in a sort of a younger influences kind of thing. So I don't always get it. I'm like, that's a thing I just don't know about. But yeah, I would definitely put that forward for some awards. And again, every this is the second volume, right, Steve? I think.
Yeah.
And the second one. Each edition, each volume is just getting better and better and more intense.
Yeah. And Bill, I think did you get the Fuck Off Squad?
Oh yeah.
No, I didn't. I was going to. I got something else.
That's on my
shelf. Was it the one with the room?
It's in a pile over there. It's
It's over there somewhere.
It's over there.
If you like satire too, Dave did Shitty Watchmen.
Shitty Watchmen, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Shitty Watchmen's
Which
great.
is
Shitty Watchmen's great.
you got to be a little bit familiar with Watchmen to appreciate this, and otherwise, yep. And then Fuck Off
Here it is,
Squad's
Fuck
over there
Off
too. But yeah, another great story. This one came out a few years ago. So.
All right, cool. Well, Jack touched on something where he was talking about
On
creators.
purpose?
Yeah.
But do we have consent? I think that's we have consent for you to touch what you touched.
Let me host, please. Let me host. Okay. But you did talk about indie creators and such a large amount of bandwidth in terms of their income is due to appearances at conventions, and we did get word this week that San Diego Comic-Con did cancel for 2020. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or and we also preface this with a discussion we had offline today about Heroes Con, which still hasn't announced a cancellation for a show that's in late June. So I was just wondering if anybody had thoughts regarding the convention season and the potential cancellations and delays that we will probably be seeing.
Well, I know one of the things that that came up. We actually were talking before the show a little bit about this too. A lot of the big summer conventions are already canceled or are in danger of cancellation or probably will be canceled, like Heroes. But the other question is, what about the fall shows? What about the late season shows like New York Comic Con? Without San Diego
Is
Comic
there still
Con,
going to be a hospital there? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, without San Diego Comic Con, like New York Comic Con is the big, second mass media pop culture comic book show. It's only second really to San Diego in terms of the bandwidth that it gets in the national consciousness. But I mean, the fall's going to be another blow out.
Yeah.
I think a thing to consider too is even at the point. I mean, I think about this in terms of like live music and even when sort of the all clear. I mean, I don't know. We're living in such a dystopia. I don't think that there's going to be a resounding all clear that you can feel confident about.
Yeah.
And even as the all clear sort of starts to make its way through the states, I think people like, if under normal circumstances you were going to have X amount of people who would go to, obviously not New York and San Diego are different because they're so big. And but I think for the smaller cons, there's a question of like how many people are going to feel confident about doing that, even when they start, like whenever things start up again, let's just say like next year, like whatever the con season is for next year. I mean, I'm curious what the skittishness will be around large public gatherings until we have like a and I mean, a lot of projections kind of like until there's some sort of what do you call? Oh gosh, man, late in the day. And so there's a serum that protects you.
A vaccine.
Vaccine. That's the word. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this guy, writer. Until there's a vaccine, like I think, like I mean, the people who are sort of like at risk, immunocompromised or at risk people are going to sort of be skittish about these things, and I think generally people are going to just be like, they're going to think twice. So it's very tough to do a show like that and just be sweating it because like the overhead to get in is really expensive, and you just be sweating it like, am I going to cover parking for this whole thing? And on top of that, to have to fight with like, depressed turnout or things like that. It's just, I think the everyone, it's all over the world in every sort of, like, I live in LA, a lot of people in Hollywood are getting affected. People, so my sister is a server, people in service industry are getting affected. But comics, like, I just feel like we're really getting a pounding, like most of the retailers, like retail, like these guys under the best of circumstances are like struggling.
Yeah.
Like a comic shop that I really love, they were like, fucking thank God for that Hickman book. That saved our bacon last year. Yeah. So like that's how close it is. Like two bad summer blockbusters and you're in in the lurch. And I just think that like I don't think a lot of these guys are set up to make it through these this much time without any revenue. And then the creators are, it's like just top down. And then we learned Diamond could only go a month without pay. So like it just feels like this whole industry is shuffling.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to kind of touch on that, on a good year, con crud is a real thing.
Yes.
I mean, like conventions are not the most hygienic places. And so I've got my ticket to Heroes Con. I've got my plane booked. I've got my room booked. It's going to be like I keep saying I joke this is my fault because I was finally going to get to go to Heroes Con and I was finally going to get to be in a room with Bill, and that's why the world had to end. Because Bill and I have been friends for years. We've never actually been in the same room together, but I think it's smart to put these. At the end of the day, it's a want, right? Like it's not a need. It's a want. It's something that we can, at least we as the consumer can get by. What worries me is folks like you, Jack, and folks like my other friends who do depend on the income from the conventions. And I think they've done a really good job of trying to mitigate that by doing online sales, by jumping over and hosting all kinds of things to bring in some income. And I would just like I said, Heroes Con has not been canceled yet. I wish they would go ahead and let us know for sure because I can use that money. Yeah. As much as I want to go, I can use that money now that I've already earmarked for going to that convention to send to creators who need it, like right now today.
Or even a postponement so that there's you have a better sense of allocation.
Yeah.
It doesn't and when you talk about the comic shops, I was having a conversation with my LCS owner today, and who is not going to be getting the DC books that come out from people because they're mad, shake their fist that the money's going to be going to a competitor. It's just it's asinine. So it's this weird spot that I'm in of wanting to support friends and wanting to support people who need it, while at the same time looking at an industry going, you don't want to grow. You want to be stagnant. And I love my LCS and I love my LCS owner. We're dear friends, but when you don't open up, I mean, this is a queer-centric podcast. The local LCS, the majority of them aren't family-friendly places, and I use the word family in regards to us. They're not places that are really welcoming to your people who aren't just kind of straight white dudes. And so when you don't think outside the box, when you don't open up on a normal day, then in the middle of a crisis when that affects your business, you've got to do some extra work there, and a lot of places aren't doing that, and that's what bothers me the most because you don't want to.
Yeah, or they don't have the tools because they, and this is kind of what I've seen a lot, and my comic shop movie kind of illustrated that a little bit. A lot of LCS owners are basically are fans that kind of just fell into, hey, I like comics a lot. I have a lot of comics. Let me just open up a store without really knowing how a business works. And when you are in an industry where you have a monopoly of distribution with one company, I mean, reading all the was it Bryan Hibbs who's like, I love Diamond.
Oh, for God's sake!
Like,
why do we give that guy so much attention?
6 months ago, everybody was.
I'd rather lick a wet pigeon than be in a room with Bryan Hibbs.
I think a lot of people have that same reaction. But like 6 months ago, people were decrying the fact that it was a single centralized location for your pipeline for basically all product, so that it's a stranglehold onto what you can get to sell your customers. Now, a lot of indie stores and a lot of stores with a very strong sense of local community have other ways of getting things. They're the ones who are highlighting zines from local creators. They're the ones that are bringing local, local publishers or local printers, very small print runs, and putting them on the counter next to the register. Like, here's your hero clicks, and here's like, this is the local indie guy who just published this out. Here's the 4 books that he gave us, to sell. Like, I mean, those are great, but they're not the majority. The majority of comic shops are, some dude who just kind of fell into selling comics and isn't necessarily great at it, and doesn't really have the clout to push back against bad decisions of everyone else.
But I do think one thing that I think everyone has to recognize is there's no definitive model to operate. Geography makes a huge impact. A store's mindset, if they're set in a university town compared to straight out suburbs or city, it's gonna be very different. And sometimes something that worked at one store, they will open up a new shop and it won't work at the second. There's so many factors, and I do think if there was a tried and true model of at least at least breaking even, I think a lot of shops would have employed that. But I guess this is in some defense of shop owners that there really isn't a mechanism that works. That's a one size fits all. And
can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because the thing to keep in mind is that this is an ecosystem. You have to look at it holistically, and all these people are connected. The comic shops are connected. There's a lot of conversations about Diamond, and as an independent comic maker, I have my own laundry list of grievances with Diamond. I worked in a comic shop, so I also know what it's like from the retail side, and there's a lot of grievances with Diamond there too. But the reason why we have Diamond is because of retail. Retail has been very resistant to the idea of having multiple order locations. It's somewhat more easy, especially when you're talking about the guys that you're talking about, Steve, or the people you're talking about, Steve, where you have one order form, you go through it on the 31st of the month, and you get all the stuff that you're going to get, versus 8 or 9 different distributors who are all sort of competing in different ways. It's a lot of noise, and people have tried to sort of nudge retail away from that, but I don't think retail should be blamed either, because these guys have really hard margins. They're in this sort of devil's bargain. The inventory that they have, if they don't sell it, they're stuck with it. It's extremely difficult to predict what's going to be liquid, and it makes them very risk averse when it comes to the sort of oddball stuff that ends up rising to the top. All these things are connected. The publishers, distribution, retail, and then ultimately consumers, and then creatives all sort of in the mix. And what is bad for all ecosystems, when the plankton die off, suddenly the whales start dying, and when the whales die off, then we can't I don't know, we can't have whale burgers. Whalers, that's what they were at McDonald's. So
our lanterns won't stay lit, I guess.
Seeing I understand everybody's sort of the immediate thing, oh, my store is not I can't get my comics, that has to be fixed. My store can't sell comics, that has to be fixed. My comic company needs to be able to distribute these comics, that has to be fixed. But the fact of the matter is, you have to look a little out beyond your immediate the immediate problem that is in your way, to what this whole industry, because there's this great idea going around about because people were saying, oh, release everything digitally, and then it's comic shop owners are oh, great, fuck me. But then this, DC is saying well, I don't want the fans to not get, this is a period in which people are sort of a captive audience, and we don't want to not touch that. So they had different ideas for how you would have you buy a digital code, and then you will eventually get the physical inventory. People are trying to look at the system and sort of keep the system afloat. But I think the truth of the matter is this is an existential threat, and it's not just gonna wipe out one channel. It's not gonna just damage. If you damage comic shops, I love digital, but digital solidly for the last 10 years, such an insignificant portion of the comic market.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's. I mean, I think the comic is a perfect form. Why do you? It is a step back to go from that to reading on your phone or possibly a tablet. Mm-hmm. So, if you lose comic retail, then like, and if then that does actually pull the whole industry down. And I know that people think that just if they keep making movies, everything will be fine. But then all we'll ever have is the same 9 Avengers.
Oh, don't worry about that. They will dig deep. They will dig deep and get some kind of
D-Man.
Yeah, D-Man. He's the who's that guy?
Triathlon.
Dennis.
Triathlon, yeah.
Me and
But I
Dennis
don't
go
know.
way back. Let's not hurt Dennis.
Okay. All right. Well, we have been talking a long time, and we do have to start wrapping up. But I don't want to leave without talking some comic book talk in terms of stuff that we're digging. So we are nothing if not gracious to our guests. So Jack, in terms of books that you're digging currently, why don't you tell us about one?
Oh, can I? This is so everything is mail order now, so I don't feel bad about saying you have to go to the internet to find this. This is Repulsive Attraction. Let me just it's first of all, look at that fucking blue end paint. It's these sort of crazy, like, beautiful strips. They're sort of kind of beautiful palette. Anyway, I picked this up. It's a great read for the end times. Well, it has a very a nihilistic, kind of cynical worldview. Patrick Steptoe, I believe I got it from Backyard Barons. It's really it's a delight, like a dark delight. Like it's Cavassier. It's a terrible taste and it makes you feel bad, but for some reason. You like it. So Patrick Steptoe, Backyard Barons. The site looks like it's entirely in Dutch or Denmarkish. What is that?
Denmarkish.
Danish?
I love these inventions of words, man. I'm just loving this because there was one time I forgot the word recently. I couldn't remember the word, so I invented Sunigo. Like, how soon ago was that?
Soon ago.
So let's just keep it going, Jack. This is awesome.
So Danish, I think it's a Danish site, but it looks like the site is in Danish, but when you get to the pay part, they'll convert it to dollars, and it's surprisingly affordable. And it took I think a couple days to get to me. So highly recommended. Highly recommended. Beautiful, crazy artwork.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to keep going in the line that I see, so I'll throw it over next to Bryan. Tell us about something you're digging, Bryan.
I just finished the DC Green Lantern miniseries Black Star. I think I might have mentioned this at one point because Morrison took over Green Lantern like 2 years ago now, and he's on to like that second volume of Green Lantern that takes place after the miniseries. But if you haven't read the miniseries, the second issue is such a delight because it is Morrison completely having his way with current DC continuity as a satirical like thing. So he's making fun of the dark, what is it called? The
Batman that laughs.
Yeah, Dark Universe.
Oh, Dark Metal.
Dark Metal. Yeah,
Metal.
He's making fun of that. He's making
Knight,
fun of the stuff with Superman and the Superboy, his son, and then the Damian relationship. He gets to touch on all these things, and like makes fun of Wonder Woman. Like, it's really funny, but then it actually fits into the story that they're telling in these 3 issues, which it's not a standalone. Like, you kind of have to know how they got to that part, with the first volume of the Green Lantern, but it is by itself a kind of a unique and interesting little experiment that he's done with the whole mythos of Green Lantern and what they do with this Black Star stuff. But then from there, I started the second volume of Green Lantern, which now, of course, they've only put 2 issues out. Still lots of fun. Liam Sharp.
Huge fun with Hal's return to Earth.
Well, and what's funny is I remember Morrison pitching this whole thing about Space Cop, Hal Jordan, and how he's kind of a player, and so they're making like jokes about polyamory, and like I feel like volume 2 is where he's finally getting to the thing he kind of pitched. But he had to go through all of this other stuff. But regardless, it's just weird, Morrison-y, fun. Liam Sharp, and there's another artist that's involved from the 2000 AD kind of comic style, the European whatever style. Like, brilliant, beautiful, funny, not your typical superhero book at all. Quite like the opposite in a delightfully subversive and satirical way. So,
Okay, over to Steve. What are you digging there, man?
Well, a few years ago, I read James Tinian and Eric Donovan's Memetic, which was an end of the world disaster epic in just, I think, one volume. It was very disturbing, beautiful story, wonderful, kept up the tension right to the end, and then just the release was not the release you wanted. So I'm not going to tell you too much more about it, but they followed it up with another end of the world comic called Cognetic. It's available in full volumes now, in just one volume. Beautiful design on the back of the book, actually, with different textured outline. I just like that kind of thing. I really do like design. It's very fun when you have cool designs on traits. But this is another.
Also a category, I think, for the Ringos.
Yes, I think so.
Design in graphic novel. If you
Glow in
haven't
the
made your
dark.
design decision.
just a hint. Just a hint.
Gun Volume 1. Did you say that glows in the dark?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Sorry,
but yeah, so Boom put this out a few years ago. I think the collected editions from 2016, sorry. And it's another sort of end of the world romp, if you would. But it's done in a very interesting style because it's basically, eons ago, a giant alien brain crashes on Earth and a small band of cavemen eat it and become basically mental gods and have the ability to take over the brains of other people. Unfortunately, when they do that, they wipe their brains clean, so those people are now dead, just basically become part of this giant consciousness, and each individual one. So the way that they depict it, every single one of those characters has a different colored word bubble, but it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful story. At first, becomes much more gory and much more impactful as it goes on. And again, not the ending that you're expecting, but cognetic.
Okay, over to Caleb. What are you digging?
So, a while back, I say a while back, it's probably been like 12 hours ago, but it feels like 17 weeks. I got a book in the mail called PTSD. Now, if you've listened to me on, SFG, or you've heard me on, this podcast, I love books that kind of dig more into character, that are kind of outside the box. And this is more of a bande dessinée, which is a French comic. For those who don't know what bande dessinée is, and if you aren't in the weeds in comicdom, why should you? But basically, the character in this book is named June, Jun, and she's a young woman who has gone off to war to fight for her country, and she's came back, and she was promised all of these things, and none of them are delivered. And she's kind of haunted by what she was asked to do by her country, and by what she had to do to survive, and by the nation that promised her that they would care and then don't. And as somebody who works with a lot of unsheltered people, and who works with a lot of veterans who come back from foreign lands where they fought a war, and they sacrificed friends, and they sacrificed a part of themselves, and come back and experience homelessness. This book, it really resonated with me from my end, and that's as somebody who's, I'm neither a vet nor have I really been homeless, but this book speaks to a lot of those things. I recognize a lot of my friends who live outside in this book, and essentially she lives in a neighborhood. She has to scrap to get food. She has to. She's seen, but she's not seen, if that makes sense. People kind of tend to ignore her unless they just choose not to ignore her, and usually that's for malicious purposes. But she recognizes everything that happens in her neighborhood, and what she realizes is that a crime syndicate is kind of rising up in her neighborhood, and it's causing problems for individuals that she has kind of become friends with from afar, if that makes sense. They don't really know that she exists, but she sees them every day, and she watches their lives. And as they overlook her, she absorbs kind of everything about them, until she does happen to meet them, and that kind of close personal connection scares her, and she runs away. But the book goes from being just an incredible, poignant, incredible, personal, almost heartfelt and heartbreaking story of patriotism and homelessness and betrayal, um, to this almost John Wickian action oriented thing where she has to dive into to stopping this mafioso style organization of bad guys who's pumping her neighborhood full of poison, full of drugs, full of evil. And it really does a good job of balancing back and forth of just the really interpersonal aspects of what it's like to be somebody who's overlooked, somebody who's overseen, somebody who society almost criminalizes their very existence, and also looks to them to save it. And I adore this book. Like I said, it's a bande dessinée, which if you're not familiar with that, French comics have their own like unique style. It's a weird mix of manga, weird mix of really European Mobius style
Yeah,
looking
Meta
art.
Barons.
Yeah, it finds a weird blend in all of that. I mean, I don't know if I'm just gonna pick a random page. Um,
Is that a
oh,
tit? No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, it could have been, but it's incredibly detailed. It's hyper raw. It doesn't play around. It doesn't hide the ball from you at all. It lets you know exactly what it is. But it really speaks to the humanity of people that get discarded and overlooked and counted out every day, and it speaks to their worth. Which again, I'm wearing a shirt that says the Van. That's the nonprofit that I work with here in Little Rock, and we see people every day that get overlooked and that get discarded and that are deemed to have no worth. That I've seen pull people out of burning buildings, literally. I've seen people pull. I've seen people who live in tents pull people out of car wrecks. I've seen them sit and talk to strangers, and prevent any number of things. I've discussed it with them myself. So, and kind of gotten life advice and really poignant connections from people who live outside. And so this book especially spoke to my heart. So go check it out. You can order it off Amazon. Your local comic shop can order it. Get it because it's fun. It's really fun.
Jesus
I like
Christ, I
that
have to
phrase.
follow that. Jesus.
Friends that live outside. That's a great way of putting it.
Jesus. You couldn't talk about Red Hood Outlaw or something, That'd be all right. Anyway, if y'all know me, you know I'm caught up on DC effectively, and so I'm turning my attention in reading. I'm kind of ping-ponging between Marvel and independent stuff. And I tried a lot of independent stuff that I thought I would dig. We Stand on Guard, a lot of translated European stuff this week, like Atlas and Axis and Werewolves of Montpellier and the Chimera Brigade, and nothing really connected with me. But what did connect with me were 4 one-shots from Marvel from 2011. They're collected on the X-Men First Class Portraits collection. I've never read any of the First Class books, but these were 4 one-shots. Cyclops by Lee Black and Dean Haspiel. Magneto, written and drawn by Howard Chaykin, and it's good Chaykin, not shitty Chaykin. Marvel Girl by Joshua Hale Fialkov and Nuna Plati, and Iceman and Angel by Brian Clevenger and Juan Doe. And I have to say, I've never, like as I said, I never touched the First Class books, but all 4 of these one-shots dealing with these X-Men in the early parts of their career in very different types of stories. Cyclops taking on a group of supervillains by himself. Magneto with a failed love affair in Brooklyn when he first came to America. Iceman and Angel with a connection and a very comedic take with Marvel Monsters. And with Marvel Girl, Jean Grey dealing with the let's say the imprint of a friend of hers from when she was a child who died. Very different stories, but in terms of these one-shot initiatives, really interesting. My history with Marvel over the past few years is I have more Marvel than I've read. And some of that was because of a very robust digital code trading platform that I was part of for a long time. So I decided to go 10 years back, what I'm calling Marvel's digital age, and that's what I'll be reading going forward. There's a lot of series that I picked up and then just dropped, and this has given me the opportunity to sample all that. So that's that's what I'm digging. And again, collected as X-Men First Class Portraits. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much, Jack, for hanging with us. And when we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast up, we do so with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment, which is where we spotlight something, be it a comic book or it might be a film, a TV program, a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair viewer, and listener may be interested in sampling. We'll start with Jack and continue on with that order. Jack, what's your woof of the week?
First of all, thank you guys for having me on. This is so much fun. Thank you for letting me talk about the book. Thanks for letting me. Thank you very much. It was great. It was a blast. Thank you. And then my woof of the week. My woof of the week is Fiona Apple's new album, "Fetch the Bolt Cutters."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys have heard it yet. Sorry if I stole your woof.
No,
but it's a masterpiece. It's like a high watermark for Fiona Apple, who is already sort of like at a high point anyway. But and just like it's very of the moment. It's sort of in that sweet spot where it speaks to a lot of things at the time when they need to be spoken to, and it's just fucking brilliant.
All right, cool. Over to Bryan. Bryan, what is your woof of the week?
So I've been playing a lot of this game that the kids are all into, called Fortnite. Have you heard of this thing? My boyfriend and I play this usually like once a day. Towards the end of the day, kind of unwind by shooting kids in the head with different assortment weapons, and that's alone worth the price of admission alone, right? That's great already. But they're doing this thing that is kind of remarkable. They're having an in-game concert by an artist, Travis Scott, who their work I'm not familiar with, but from what I am seeing of the visuals leading up to the concert started today. Today's the 3rd of April. The concerts are now ongoing throughout the weekend, and so if you're interested you play Fortnite already, then you should just show up and check it out. You get like a free item or something. But like that, it's a game where you're basically shooting each other, but they take a break to watch this in-game concert, which evidently is like phenomenal what they're doing with graphics, and the whole thing just sounds like a spectacle, like something that, or at the end of times is now so meaningful to see in isolation and quarantine, these bizarre virtual concerts and things. But so if you play Fortnite, it's free. You don't have to pay anything to do this. You just download it on your phone or your game system of choice, computer, and be prepared to die a lot and enjoy.
Okay, over to Steve. Steve, what's your woof?
Well, I watch a lot of TV, but I don't watch a lot of late night TV. I don't like a lot of the, sort of late night. Let's see who the guest list is. What's the band leader? His snide comment. But I do watch sort of the children or grandchildren or stepchildren of The Daily Show. So I love Samantha Bee and her Full Frontal, and I also love John Oliver and his Last Week Tonight. And one of the things that is unique about the situation that we're in is that live TV and these, talk shows and late night shows that rely on a large live studio audience obviously can't have that. And, for the first week or two of quarantine and self-isolation and the shelter in place orders, A lot of these shows just didn't know what to do. So I know with the late night show, it's basically them at their house, dialing in a lot of their friends. What Samantha Bee and John Oliver have done is they've set up at their homes, of course, but in very different ways. So John Oliver's created it sort of just this office that's all painted white and gray in the background, um, but is still providing sort of the same format in a very interesting way. And then Samantha Bee has gone the other route, and she's doing her show outside. Her kids are involved in, managing the sound and the cameras. Her husband's also helping as well, and it's just a lot of fun to see these two comedians who also provide a really great news service still being able to make hilarious, wonderful TV. Their writers, of course, are all working remotely, but they're keeping the show alive, their shows alive, with some very interesting gimmicks and guests as well. So if you haven't, Last Week Tonight, Sunday nights on HBO, and Full Frontal with Samantha Bee every Wednesday night on TBS.
Okay, over to Caleb. Caleb, what are you providing for your Wolf of the Week?
Oh,
Mike,
Caleb, you're on mute.
Mike, can't hear you.
I'm muted. Alt A apparently turns that off. My first Wolf of the Week goes out to comic creators who wear sailor hats. It's got a big spot in my heart.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Jack. This was a lot of fun. My Wolf of the Week actually goes out to. I am not a big TV watcher. It's something I like. I'm the exact antithesis of Steve. I very rarely watch TV. It's not my thing. But my husband eats, sleeps, and breathes it. So we started watching this new series on, I think it's Netflix, called Sex Education. That there are there's two seasons out now, and the third one is pending. Um, it is it is phenomenal. It is witty. It is smart. It's young. It's kind of fresh. It takes a big look at literally sex education through the eyes of a young man who he's trying to deal with all the high school bullshit that I think we all dealt with. But his mother is kind of Dr. Ruth. If that's a throwback that people still recognize, I may have just like aged myself. But she his mom is very much this out in the open, say what it is, sexual savant, so to speak, and becomes a teacher at his high school, and he starts giving sex advice based on his life, but also he can't actually have sex himself because being the son of a sex therapist and the son of a his father had a big impact on his life, who is no longer around, has made him not impotent but relatively useless in the bedroom, and he has to like deal with that. And where it's really fun. It's and the important side of it is it does get at actual sexual issues. It doesn't beat around the bush, and it makes you as the viewer think about your own sex life, and more than just your own sex life when it comes to, are you being gratified? Are you being satisfied? Is there any gratuity there?
Gratified.
Gratified, actually.
It's a warband too.
There you
I'm pulling
go.
a Jack. But no, it does. It asks you to think about it on more of an interpersonal level, and for a TV show to have that is interesting, and it makes you it speaks to the power of television, and it speaks to the power of these kind of episodic serial narratives that we delve into, be it in comics or in television or in 24 episodes of one giant long Marvel movie that can open up our entire world to a way of thinking. I thought it was worth noting, and that's got to be my Wolf of the Week.
Okay, cool. For my Wolf of the Week, we sort of touched on this in terms of the phenomenon of the at-home concert. And yesterday, as it was broadcast on New York television locally and streamed through various sites, I wanted to mention the Jersey for Jersey concert. this was a remarkably well done show. And you can fast forward through Bon Jovi. Um, um,
What?
hey, hey, John Bon Jovi did a lot of the planning for the show, so God bless him. I just don't want to have to listen. But there were some wonderful musical performances, including Bookends by Bruce Springsteen. There also was a reunion of Fountains of Wayne. If you followed the news, Adam Schlesinger, who was the principal singer and songwriter of that band, fell victim to COVID-19 and died. And
Rest in pizza.
yeah, and they reunited to perform Hackensack, which is also the name of the town that next to where I grew up. And in the middle of that, around the performances, you had some really touching stories of first responders and of people on the front lines at grocery stores and restaurateurs. And it was a really well done show, and all of the profits that generated go to the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, and their website is njprf.org. And what this organization does is it actually grants funds to existing organizations that have demonstrated a track record of caring for vulnerable communities. And I'm not usually a homer on this show, but for once I'm going to show some Jersey pride, and that is going to serve as my wolf of the week. So, all right, Jack, if people want to reach out to you on the interwebs, where can they go?
Please, if you are on Twitter, follow me at Jack Foster 74. That's my name, Jack Foster plus 74. And that's on Twitter. I'm Reckless Eyeballs on Instagram, and then I think I'm linked in through the Facebook. I think I'm highlighted, so you can find me through there. And then the comic, you can find it at guncomic.com. I think I didn't have a chance to say earlier, but I'm one of the guys. I'm in a position where I can make the comic available to people. I know that people are sort of like, looking for content while they're sheltering at home. So I think there'll be a link if you want to download Gun Volume 1 for free during this crazy time. Don't forget, not just me, just fill out the Ringo Awards, nominate some people, get them some recognition for the hard work that they do.
All right. Well, we're wrapping this on up now. We are the Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears at No, you can't. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to write to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to us, please do so through iTunes. Subscribe to us there. Listen to us on Stitcher Radio and some of the other podcatching platforms. And now viewing us on our YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Bryan Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
Well, you're going to, if you're listening, we'll hear a wolf and an explosion, and we'll be back next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye.